All right, I believe we are live, and hopefully the chat is working. We'll see when people start posting, but this is the, what is it, September. I can't, months are flying by, I can't keep them straight. September live stream it's supposed to be for supporters, and hopefully some of them will show up, but so far it's just me and Chris. How you doing, Chris?
Good. So it's the day after 9/11.
Yep.
Yeah.
What was that someone had said? And this was only a few years after 9/11, but they said, oh, they were going to start the 9/12 committee because Americans had gotten too complacent about terrorism, and they wanted to go back to the way we felt on 9/12. And Harry Brown responded, I'd rather go back to the way we were on 9/10.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's still funny how the TSA insists that they need to touch your ball sack and stick their hands up your butthole to prevent another 9/11, even though actual security experts have said that actually won't have stopped them.
Yeah, but if you don't put up with that, the terrorists win.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you don't want our boogeyman of the decade to win, do you?
Okay, I'm guessing we're live. It looks like we're live. No one's in the chat room so far. We might just be talking to thin air, but just in case we aren't, you got anything you want to talk about tonight, Chris?
No, let's just wait for other people to join. Maybe I'm a repellent.
I don't know, but we usually don't have dead air when you're on. So, yes, Rainbow Asteroids. Thank you. And I apologize, Rainbow Asteroids, for not remembering that you were the one who donated the last time when I was thanking everyone at the end, but I don't see that stuff on my end. So
precious users, they came for us.
Yeah.
My preciouses.
You ever seen that funny, it was at the awards ceremony when Return of the King was winning a nomination, and the guy who played Gollum was getting a nomination, and Smeagol/Gollum actually appeared CGI-wise, and he started ranting and raving about how it was a pain in the ass to work on Lord of the Rings, and he does not appreciate any of the people.
Yeah, technically Smeagol is the non-CGI one before he got the ring, and then it's Gollum after that. That's how they did it in the script.
Yeah, it's pretty funny, and Smeagol's trying to calm Gollum down. He's like,
he's accepting the reward. Now it's my reward. Nobody likes you. Dobby likes me. Dobby is a pork.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of time for games, Rainbow Asteroids. Chris, you ever heard of this SCP Secret Lab?
No, I haven't. But I'm familiar with the SCP. It's basically an internet, it's a spiritual successor to Lovecraftian horror, basically.
What does SCP stand for?
Secure, Contain, Protect.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a fantasy creative writing wikia. It's composed it's about a fictional organization called the SCP Foundation, and basically their job is to find, contain, and secure anomalous or cosmic horrors, which often we don't understand, and their job is to either contain them and in some rare cases destroy them, but they can't really.
See, with a name like that, I would have expected to be, some kind of Call of Duty-esque Secret Service type thing. I mean, in my opinion, if you can't really tell what kind of game it is from the name, you've given it the wrong name.
Well, yeah, it's a very niche thing. It's one of those things where you have to like Lovecraftian horror to really get into it, because Because the thing with the SCP Foundation, especially with a lot of the SCPs, is that while they'll explain, what the anomalies do to you, and some of them are pretty disturbing, they don't actually explain where they come from or what their motivation is or what their weaknesses are, because Lovecraftian horror is all about the philosophy of nothing is scarier.
Right.
Yeah, meaning you don't know what it is, you know. And a lot of SCPs, it's heavily established that they're cosmic beings way beyond human comprehension, and they could literally wipe out our entire universe just by blinking their eyes if they wanted to.
Yep. Which is actually, I gotta say, that's the part of Lovecraft that never really worked for me, because it's not a horror if you just go completely defeatist. And you're like, oh,
Yeah, I
what's the
know.
point? They can kill us at any time. There has to be like some little edge of hope to keep the horror going.
Well, yeah, that's what makes a horror movie suspenseful. And in all honesty, that's why I hate horror movies, that have, the fake, happy ending, or the whole everyone dies, because then it's like, well, then what was the freaking point?
Yeah.
It's like, what was the freaking point? It's like, okay, they get out of there. Oh no, the killer, despite the fact that he was hit on the head, shot 25 different times, and run over by a huge pickup truck, he's still alive and he killed the girl.
Oh god, that was what I really hated about Hollow Man. I mean, I hated a lot of things about Hollow Man, but the thing I really hated was, I mean, this guy was only really supposed to get invisibility, and he got, like, burned alive and, crashed in an elevator and all sorts of stuff, and he was still going after him. It's like, no.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I can understand the indestructible monster, but there's got to be a reason for the indestructible monster. Like a good example is Jason Voorhees. He's a resurrected corpse, that's been brought back through unknown means, so you can't just shoot him,
The way you do it is you keep enough of it a mystery until it's time for them to defeat them. I forget where I heard this, but it's really good. The enemy you don't see is a monster. The enemy you do see is a logistical problem.
Oh. Yeah.
And I mean, that's the problem with a lot of, especially those cheesy movies they make for the Sci-Fi Channel years ago, when they started doing originals, and it was all about people being chased by big things. Well, the problem is, if you actually see the whole thing, you're like, oh, it's an 8-foot cockroach. Once you see it's an 8-foot cockroach, you can start thinking about how to defeat an 8-foot cockroach. But if you can't quite see it or can't quite understand what it is, like Predator, that was a good one.
Yeah,
because you couldn't really tell what it was.
Yeah, you couldn't really tell what it was, but that famous scene, where they finally managed to graze it with one of their bullets. He realizes, well, that's good. It's like, why is that good? Because if it bleeds, then that means it's mortal and we can kill it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what happens as you learn more about the monster. It becomes more and more possible to kill, and then you can.
Yeah.
Then you can do that.
Although going back to H.P. Lovecraft, if you actually read about the guy, don't get me wrong, he was a talented writer, but he was not the guy you'd want to be a personal friend with, because he was, for lack of a better word, he was a cynical guy.
Yeah, from what I understand, that's putting it lightly. Wrote some good books, but
yeah, he wrote some good books, and he's got an interesting sense of horror, but he was not a cool guy to hang with. I mean, he had little to no friends. He only got married once, and even then, that was arranged. And according to his wife, she actually had to teach him how to have sex because he never heard of it because he was so isolated. And
yeah. Well, it's kind of like you and I were saying on Discord earlier today about Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. The guy is just an absolute genius when it comes to songwriting, one of the best that's ever lived. But man, all the crap he put everyone else through.
Oh yeah, especially like you said with his relationship with David Gilmour. They were constantly fighting. And
well, I mean, it was all right at first, but it seemed like, I guess it was like after they made Animals and really, making The Wall. I think it was by the time The Wall came out, Waters was all like, well, this is, my album, and we're going to make it how we want to. And that wasn't how they made, Dark Side of the Moon. And then I forget what the album was after The Wall. I forget the name of it, but not a lot of Pink Floyd fans really know it because everyone considers it to be a Roger Waters solo album.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And so that was his last album with Pink Floyd. And
yeah, that's another problem, is that a lot of people, is that he was also an egoist that like to take credit and all that. And I think David Gilmour said that he's gone on record at taking credit for songs. It's like, no, me and the other guys contributed much to it too.
Yeah,
And don't even get me. Oh, sorry. You can continue.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's like when they made the movie The Wall, they did the thing that I hate, that I cannot stand. You will never see this on a film of mine, but it starts off, a film by Roger Waters.
Oh.
You will never see a film by Shane Killian. No, there's no by one person when it comes to filmmaking. A novel, yes. Yeah, or something like that.
I mean, that's technically true. Like if you make some of those, like independent animation films and all that, and you do it all by yourself. But other than that,
well, yeah, I mean, like my YouTube videos for the most part are by Shane Killian because I'm the only one involved in the production of them. But when you're making a film and you've got co-producers and actors and other people who are contributing to it, they can take your film and really transform it into something completely beyond what you imagined.
Yeah. And in all honesty, that lack of ability, I mean, hang on, Shane, my mom's calling.
All right. Yeah, and, to continue with that thought, all of the people who go into making the movie, that's why you have that big long list of credits at the end. So... Shane, do you have recommendations for full drive encryption software? Obviously backdoor if possible. I've heard of Veracrypt, but is it really safe?
I'm back. Sorry, my mom just called me. I gotta help her carry in groceries in a few minutes, but I'll still be back. But
all right, so Veracrypt, it's been audited. I guess if you really want to make sure, if you're really going to be paranoid, and I forget which version it was audited, but you can see it on their website. If you go up to the next version above that little decimal point version above that, that's the one where they fixed the problems with the audit, and there weren't many. So Veracrypt is really safe. So,
and JC Armitage, to answer your question, P173 is like the Angel, except it's instead of sends you to a different time.
You're dropping out. I didn't catch what you said.
Oh, I said, JC Armitage says it's an SCP-173, kind of similar to the Angels from Doctor Who, and I was just telling him, yeah, except it snaps your neck instead of sends you to a different... Yeah.
Well, and that was a twist in one of the episodes when the Angels stopped just sending people back in time and started killing them. They were like, whoa, why is that happening? Angels just send you back in time, so...
Yeah. And as for 3 Neutro 2 LOL, the SCP Foundation nowadays, they don't even care about the monsters anymore because I'm on the website. Now they're actually more concerned about stories within the story, basically, So, they don't just want, here's my anomaly and here's how to contain it. They want something like they want like some sort of mini story in it, like, a series of journal logs or testing logs that kind of gives, an insight to the object or the story of it. It's kind of hard to explain, but like I said, they have very strict standards these days, so you can't just post anything on them anymore. Funny thing about the SCP, just like with the Lovecraft story, even though it's clearly horror, there's many people that insist that it's real.
Oh, yeah, like the number of people who insist that, the Necronomicon is a real book. I got a copy of it around somewhere. So, yeah, it's a real book, but it's a real book that... I don't know if Lovecraft himself actually wrote the Necronomicon or if someone else kind of compiled it from the Lovecraft mythos.
Believe it or not, the Cthulhu mythos wasn't exactly invented by Lovecraft himself. It was actually created when he came into contact with a few other, reclusive authors, and they would exchange notes, to each other, and they just loved coming up, with scary monsters and anomalous concepts and all that.
Yeah.
There's actually recognized stories like the story of the Yellow King, that are recognized as being within the Lovecraft horror verse, but it's not actually written by Lovecraft.
See, as long as we're talking about games here, I'm not going to be able to contribute a whole lot.
Yeah, guys, Shane's not a gamer, maybe if you talk about Pong or the Atari, he'll know, but...
You want to talk Lemmings? We'll talk Lemmings.
Yeah. Yeah, remember when Shane was a little boy, the biggest game system he ever saw was that thing in the arcade machine that went boop boop boop.
We actually had it wasn't actually a Pong machine because Pong was, I forget who made Pong, and this was from a different company. But it was that same thing where you had the black and white and the paddles going back and forth, and
Yep.
it had it was 4 games all total. It was that, there was a breakout game. What were the
yeah.
other two? But it was that kind of stuff. Yeah, so that was my first game console.
Yeah. Actually, the very first video game ever made was actually made in the 40s. Apparently, some guys in the U.S. Navy or Air Force apparently they rigged a satellite machine to bounce a ball back and forth. And my dog's barking, so that's my mom. So I gotta go help her out. I'll be back in a few.
All right. Yeah, I thought it was interesting when I found out that the Russian guy who made Tetris wrote it on a PDP-8 and was all on a text screen. Okay, so now it's just me. The Darth is away for a few minutes, so what can we have here in the chat? The infinite IKEA is fun. I don't know what you're talking about, but there is an interesting thing about IKEA. If you actually go into an IKEA and that weird curvy layout they have, I don't know if anyone knows if this is on purpose, but mathematicians have said that's an awful lot like this thing called the Hilbert curve, which is the way of maximizing the length of the pathway in a finite area, but it's fractal. You can always lengthen it more and more by making the width of the pathway smaller and smaller and actually go down to infinity and have an infinitely long pathway in a finite area because it's infinitesimally narrow. So that sounds like an IKEA, doesn't it? Still suffering with Win 10 will switch soon. Yeah, switch to Linux, yeah. Yeah, if you've got software like me that needs to run on Windows, then you gotta run Windows. But man, Linux is so much nicer. Rainbow Asteroid said I had to swap back because Steam devs love Windows and Proton is less than perfect. Yeah, I don't really know about Steam, but I love it when they try to make things run under Reaper. I mean, not Reaper. Wine. I got the wrong name there. I do that. I'm sorry. Reaper does run under Wine, though. So that is a nice thing the developers do. Make sure it runs under Wine. Steve Gibson also did that with the Windows Squirrel client. And a bunch of us were running it on Wine to make sure that it could work on Linux until other Linux options were available. I think the only other option available right now is the browser extension, because that works on any.
I'm back. Sorry.
All right, it works on any Chromium or Firefox-based browser. How do you feel about Proton Mail? I don't really have any feelings about it. I don't use it. It's just I have given up. I've given up on email trying to be secure. Just understand, consider email as just being in a big pile on the floor, in like this, Grand Central Station or somewhere with a lot of treat emails like that.
Actually,
just
Shane,
understand it's not secure. It's not gonna be secure. Just live with it.
Hey Shane, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you pretty good. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I was just about to say that's actually kind of relevant to what happened to me today because I had a meeting with an insurance company to get some insurance with my mom's help, and one of the options was to receive information was either in the letter or email or text, and the lady was like, I don't get why they offer that option, because if you select email or text, you're just asking for your information to get breached sometime in the future.
Oh yeah, because texting is not secure at all. It's real easy to intercept. And it's one of those cases, it's like every time they did this with IPv6, and they did it with the latest 5G standards for that. Everyone says, okay, let's do this right. Let's build in security and encryption from the start. Someone comes in and puts the kibosh on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they had said that with IPv6, okay, we're going to have network layer encryption on all the time, everywhere. And then all of a sudden, all sorts of, big companies complained. It was like, okay, we'll make it an option.
And on a minor oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead with what you're saying.
Well, this doesn't have to do with encryption, but it was about people who think that getting rid of guns will stop mass, attacks. Because I read a funny story about something that happened in Canada. There was an attack at a Home Depot in Canada where a guy attacked and injured, I think it was like 7 people, and guess what he used? A shovel.
Yeah.
Yeah, a shovel.
What was that the Klingons said all that time ago back in the 60s? 1,000 throats may be slit in one night by a running man.
Yep.
I do not encrypt my drives as just a matter of course. I have, some file systems and personal files that I have encrypted, but I probably should. I know I preach the benefits of encryption. I probably should have full drive encryption everywhere, but I don't.
Yeah.
If I ever build up a new system from scratch, I'll probably put full drive encryption on it. But once you get an established system going, it's really hard to make big changes like that.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not a tech geek and all that, and that's why, as we said earlier, that's why it just pisses me off, when the tech experts aren't doing their damn jobs, because I don't know jack shit about encryption. So,
well, and that's like what people say. It's like, well, you have the option. You can use Signal instead of texting. You can do this. You can do that. How are most users going to know to do that? How are they going to know how to do it? How are they going to know that they even should do it? It is up to the designers of the protocols and the implementers to make it secure. Users should not have to be put in the position where they have to worry about it.
Oh, yeah. And the thing is, Shane, I think we brought this up that one time, even when they do know what they're doing and they try to hack into it, the company comes along and says, hey, you can't encrypt that computer. That's violating our IP rights.
Yeah. Yeah, there's all sorts of strange stuff like that.
Yeah, you can't own those mathematical equations. We say they belong to us because a piece of paper written by some bureaucrats said they're ours.
And the theory is, and I don't know if there's anything to this or if it's just a conspiracy theory or whatever, but the theory is the reason why all of these companies keep complaining about, IPv6 being encrypted and 5G being encrypted by default and stuff like that is because the government's coming in from behind them. I mean, we know the government has forced Microsoft to put backdoors into Skype.
Well,
that's something we actually know. And so that's the thought, that all these governments are going into these companies saying, hey, you need to object to all this encryption because then we won't be able to spy on people.
Yep.
I have my SD card with a VeraCrypt file on there. That's enough encryption for me. Yeah, I have VeraCrypt containers on my removable drives, and also my backups have encryption built into it.
I will say,
if you have a removable drive that someone can just grab and run off with, yeah, that's something you have to worry more about encrypting.
Yeah, Shane, what's the dumbest thing I've ever heard people say about encryption though, and all that, is that they're like, well, if you have something that you don't want other people to know about, why are you posting it online?
If you don't have anything to hide.
Yeah.
I like what Edward Snowden said to that. That's like saying you shouldn't care about losing free speech rights if you have nothing to say.
Yep.
Rainbow Asteroid says, I don't have a NAS or anything, so I don't need to worry about resetting my network. I'm not sure what you mean resetting your network. The idea of a NAS is just always there. So having a NAS would mean you wouldn't have to worry about it. Will the Facebook coin be positive or negative for cryptos? I don't really see it being a negative because, it's not going to affect what Dash and all these other crypto projects are doing, and it might be a positive in that it might be the gateway drug for people, using other cryptos. And also, I've said this before, it kind of looks like with the Facebook coin, what are they calling it? The Libra or whatever it is. But they're kind of doing the thing where they're jumping out in front of the other cryptos, waving their arms, go, hey, regulate us, regulate us. So maybe we'll shake out a lot of these regulatory issues with governments.
Yeah. Yeah, cryptocurrencies. That's why when I saw that episode of Biographics where Simon Whistler tried to take on that was just the most cringy thing I ever saw. Especially when he was talking about Silk Road. It's like Simon, is your research team just going to listen to whatever the government said it did?
I think so. There's a really good documentary about it that's linked to from freeross.com that will go, oh man, this goes into so much detail.
Yeah.
It is so thoroughly researched and sourced.
Yeah.
You know, it's not at all conspiratorial. They're just giving you the facts, and it will make you so outraged.
Oh yeah, because like you said, you know, there was literally nothing that they had from, and literally the judge had to make up all these lies and basically threaten the jury to say, yeah, you got to convict him to that double life sentence with no. I'm going to be really mad, and you don't want the government being mad at you.
Yeah, she pretty much bullied the jury into coming back with a guilty verdict, and then based her double life sentence on the rumor that, because that's really all it is, that he hired hitmen, which he was never charged with. You know, they never presented any evidence. He never got to defend himself. They were saying, oh, we're going to bring charges in Maryland. Those charges were dismissed with prejudice, which means that they can never be brought up again, which generally means that, you know, that's a good thing because there's nothing to them. But now, in this case, it means that Ross is sitting in jail for life for something that he not only never got to defend himself against, he never will get to defend himself against. He will never be able to go in court and say, hey, put up your evidence that I did this so I can respond to it.
Yeah, and something tells me even if the jury did find him not guilty, there's no doubt in my mind the judge would have just declared, oh, the jury's biased, we get mistrial, we gotta do it all over again.
Yeah, Rainbow Asteroids, I feel like Libra will help crypto spread, but it may also give people a false sense of security, so it's a bittersweet win. Yeah, it's kind of like I was saying earlier about encrypting, you know, IPv6 and 5G and all of that. It's like people come up and say, oh, let's do this, and then someone comes in for the back door and says, well, let's do the same thing but make it less secure.
Yeah, it's
currently encrypting. This is 3-nitrotoluol. I don't know how to pronounce that. Currently encrypting all my drives because of a possible government raid coming my way. I don't have anything to hide. I really just want to piss them off when they try and open my stuff. And this is what I would love to see happening. Someone has something that's, you know, GPG encrypted, or a drive that's encrypted with a Faircrypt or something like that. And the police are like, we need to get in it. We need to get in this. We need to see what's in there. And the guy fights it in court and fights it. And then, you know, it goes up to the appeal and the Supreme Court and everything. And it's like, we've got to do this. We've got to do this. And it makes major national headlines and stuff like that. And so finally they rule against him. And he says, okay, you know, here's the encryption key or the password or whatever it is. You know, here's how you get in. And they get in, and it's a bunch of recipes for chutney. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, like that time when Geraldo, you know, was having this big thing for opening up Al Capone's vault, and they hired all these guys, they hired all these guys to break open the locks, and when they opened it up, they found out, it looks like it was empty decades
There's
ago.
nothing in there. Yeah, it's like they said in the movie UHF. Nothing! Absolutely nothing! Stupid! You're so stupid!
Thing is, though, Shane, well, it hasn't gone on that level. I have seen videos like that, you know, of, you know, police, you know, getting all pissed off, you know, because the guy won't let them search his car, and he's like, yeah, he's not cooperating. He's definitely searching my car, and, you know, he's putting up this fight, and finally they get their warrant, they tear apart the car, they spend all this money, you know, bringing in all those people to bring it in, and they discover there's nothing in the car.
Well, that happens all the time, yeah.
Yeah,
there was another time. This wasn't police or anything, but these were like, you know, archaeologists, and they were having this, you know, live on, you know, whatever network it was, and they were going to, and all they had to do was make it through this wall, and once they got through this wall, oh, this might be bigger than King Tut's tomb, and, you know, there might be all these golden jewels, and you'll all see it as we do, and they made all this big deal about it and all this hype, and they finally make it through the wall, and behind the wall was another wall.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And what was
That's
behind
why
that wall?
you don't see people doing that much anymore.
And what's behind that wall? Another wall?
I don't know what they ever found, but it was just funny. It's like, oh, there's another wall.
Kind of reminds me of this funny thing I saw where, people are talking about how we need to explore the bottom of the ocean because who knows what's down there and all, and they treat it like it's this undiscovered world that has like all these hidden civilizations and they're in there. Then it's like, you see anything down here? I saw a weird looking fish with 3 glowing eyes. I mean, it's like, don't get me
JC,
wrong.
is that true? Are investors pulling out of Libra? Because last I heard they had like upwards of 30 partners in it, and I mean there were people like PayPal and Visa and just like big players like that. Veracrypt plausible deniability can offer. Yeah, that's a feature I love about Veracrypt. What you can do, I mean, you can just have it as normal, whether it's a password protected volume where your password is turned into an encryption key, but they have what's called a hidden volume. That's an option you can put on there. And what you do is you give it a second password that's your plausible deniability password, and you put your innocuous data on there, so if they've got a gun to your daughter's head saying, you'd better give us the password, and you go, okay, I'll give it to you. You just give them that plausible deniability password, and they see all this innocuous data.
Yeah.
Of course, the thing about it is, it's generally known that Veracrypt has that. So if you don't do a good job with it and keep it up to date or make it look good or whatever, they might say, hey, there's a couple of JPEGs from 15 years ago. Yeah, we think you need to give us the real password. So that if you it's one of those things. If you don't do it right, it might backfire on you.
And actually, Shane. Oh, great. What was I thinking about? Oh, great. Now I can't remember what I was thinking. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Rainbow, exactly. The hard part is making fake sensitive data. And that's the issue that privacy coins are having, like Monero or Dash with private send mode or things like that, is that until you get to a point where there's a certain level of adoption and you've got a certain number of people doing this, you have to have enough mixing partners to mix with in order to make all this privacy work. If you don't, the system will generate decoys, but even though they're supposed to be pseudo-random, in the past, they've kind of cracked these like, hey, wait a minute, these decoys are kind of, predictable. They're not like, they're not like regular transactions, and so they have to update the protocol to do it. So yeah, it's really hard to make fake data to hide the real data in.
I know how to get you going. Talk about data encryption.
Yeah.
I still find that.
And JC mentions Filthy Heretic in Marianne Ancap Kitty's recent live stream, and I did not see that, so someone please grab a link to it and post it there so we can all go view that.
Yeah. On a completely random note, I still laugh at that one live stream we had where like 2/3 of the entire live stream was just you and that one guy talking about quantum physics. Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about all sorts of stuff here. You never know what these live streams are going to cover. Anyone know how to securely encrypt SSDs? The hardware encryption is obviously crap. Where leveling makes use of Veracrypt unsecure? That's not true if you start off with a blank SSD and then put Veracrypt on it. But if you're starting with stuff on your SSD and you're trying to convert it into a Veracrypt volume, so what you want to do is you want to copy all the stuff off the SSD over to another drive, delete everything from SSD, and then run the trim command. And lots of data recovery people who would stand to make a lot of money if they could do this have come and said, yeah, we can't do it once you run the trim command. We can't recover data from it. So you do that, and then you create your Veracrypt volume on it and then copy it over there. So that's how you need to do that.
Speaking of data encryption, how's about that 4th chapter of Personal Encryption by Rainbow? I don't know about that.
I think it's probably talking about my encryption series, which I pretty much finished, but I'm thinking of doing a 4th part on to cover quantum encryption. The problem is I have to understand it before I make a video about it. So It's crazy stuff. And I'm coming to the conclusion, and I mentioned this in one of the videos in the comments with another commenter, but I'm starting to come to the conclusion that quantum computing isn't going to be the big panacea as everyone's claiming it to be. I mean, it'll be awesome. You'll be able to do some amazing things to it, but it won't be like opening up where we'll be able to do everything instantly and have practically infinite computing power. I don't think that's going to happen.
I know the panacea that will cure all your computer problems. Just pour in fermented kale juice into it mixed with Himalayan salt. That'll cure everything.
Just drop it in a 30-foot hole and pour concrete over it. That'll do it.
You didn't get what I was talking about though, right? Jilly juice.
Oh no, what's Jilly juice?
Basically, it's this woman who thinks that if you drink this large, bottle and it's filled with fermented lettuce and cabbage juice, which is basically just fermented lettuce and water, and it's mixed with heavy levels of mass amounts of Himalayan salt, as she points it. So it's like it's more salty than salt water, and she says it'll cure everything, and it leads to really nasty side effects like diarrhea. And when people bring that up, she's like, no, it's not diarrhea. They're called waterfalls. Diarrhea is bad. Waterfalls is your body purging, the parasites and mold out of you.
I think I read about it. Is that where the one where this guy drank nothing but that for 3 days and then died of dehydration?
Yeah,
because it's got so much salt in it.
There's been a few deaths linked to her. There's also been people that have experienced seizures and all sorts of other bad stuff happening to them. And Jillian just replies, "You're not doing it right."
Yeah, if it's that easy to do it wrong, then there's something wrong with your product. Rainbow Asteroids. IBM released quantum ready encryption, right? The technical term is post-quantum encryption, and there are several people who have proposed protocols. There's none that the security community has really grabbed on and said this is the next thing, but NIST has said that they're going to do another contest on it like they did when they selected the SHA-3 algorithm. So, everyone's kind of looking at that, and, they're being very open about that and taking input from the community. In reality, and I think this is a good model, NIST themselves are doing very little. They're just opening it up and having a forum where everyone can come in and see what kind of consensus they can get. So, I mean, probably, 5 years from now, they'll probably figure out, what the good post-quantum protocols are going to be.
Actually, going back to pseudoscience products and those panacea miracle cures, there actually was one argument that one person told me that, granted it was mostly a joke, but it's still pretty funny, is that there's actually one good thing that comes out of those dangerous, panacea products that you read about. It's good for the gene pool, because if they're dumb enough to believe a random person on the internet over their own doctor, then I don't want them reproducing.
Yeah, it's a Darwin Award.
Yep.
It says, do you frequent r/out of the loop? I'm feeling that's a joke, but the fact is I go on Reddit very rarely because that place is so toxic.
Oh, yeah. It's and 4chan, It's pretty funny because I don't like 4chan either, but I was watching a video about the time Tumblr tried to take 4chan down, and it was like an SJW raid and all that, and it failed miserably. And I'm like, wow, you're doing something bad when I give kudos to 4chan.
Yeah, and it's like, when I'm doing all of this stuff, trying to read up on there is a lot of good stuff on Reddit because you can get good comments from people who know what they're talking about and learn about how this kind of stuff works. But like there was one time, a lot of these people just get so toxic in the comments, and I have no idea why so many crypto fans are like, and it's in particular Bitcoin BTC fans, Bitcoin SV fans, and Monero fans. They seem to be the worst. They're just so toxic to anyone who dares to say something good about any other crypto. And like there was one, this was actually a Litecoin thing, and that's not as bad, but Charlie Lee has made that community pretty toxic as well. And there was one guy, but anyway, there was one guy who was, because they were talking about all these innovations Dash made, and there's this huge list of innovations Dash has done and they should really be proud of. And so someone said, well, what's Litecoin done? Because there's basically been no Litecoin development for years. And someone said, Litecoin invented Scrypt. And the only thing I did was I responded to his comment and I just said, no, Colin Percival invented Scrypt for Tarsnap. and that comment got moderated.
Eh.
Yeah, that's how these moderators are. They are so censorious. You know, you even go a little bit away from that 3x5 index card and they'll moderate your comment or even ban you.
Yeah, it's still funny though how Simon Whistler said that cryptocurrency is being treated like a religion, and you pointed out it's not a religion because it changes and modifies itself over time. Religions almost never do that, and when they do,
Yeah.
there's usually some sort of civil war that comes out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they do seem to do a lot of hard forks, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you started off with Christianity, now there's 30,000 different denominations of
Yeah.
Christianity.
And
a small pinch of Bose-Einstein condensate. Well, that just adds spice to it. Or like when libertarians defend Trump, yeah, that drives me up the wall when they do
oh
that.
yeah, because I don't like Trump either, but it just drives me up so much when they say that Donald Trump said that he likes Hitler, that he wants to eat all the Mexican babies. It's like, no, he didn't say that,
Oh,
And
what was that one? There was something that just came up today. Like he forgot he had a son. He forgot that Barron Trump was his son. I'm like, what? And I went back and I kind of traced it back and saw what he was talking about. And what he was talking about was his wife, Miliana, being very concerned about this issue. And the reason why she's so concerned is because she has a son, and stuff like that. And so they were misinterpreting that phrase, she has a son, as Trump forgot about his son and stuff like that. And it's like, it's amazing how they're making this big deal about him saying that and not really talking about the subject, which was that Trump wants to ban vaping.
Yeah, and that's actually, it's like, people like to hate on Trump all the time, but the thing is at the end of the day, Trump is just basically every single politician, both Democrat and Republican, but he's open about what he actually believes in. That's what I give Donald Trump kudos for at the very least, is that, he's not trying to say, oh no, we're not doing this, what we're actually doing is that. No, he just flat out says, yeah, this is what I want to do. And I think that's the reason why a lot of people like him, even if they disagree with him, is because he's, for the most part, honest about his opinion. He's open about it. If he wants to, build a wall around the U.S. border, he just flat out says, "I want to build a wall." He doesn't try to cherry coat it and say, "Well, we're just gonna better secure the border and all this and that."
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wow.
Yeah.
It's like.
Yeah, and JC Armitage is talking about Dogecoin. Isn't it funny how a joke currency with no supply cap is more valuable than the US dollar? And it's actually funny since basically nobody's using it either.
Yeah.
Doesn't Doge equal a dollar? I think that's Tether you're talking about. Tether is set up where it's going to adjust itself so that it's about $1. A Tether, it might be 99 cents or it might be $1, but it's pretty much going to be one Tether being $1. Which is not actually how the Libra is going to be. People are saying, oh, they're going to peg it to a currency. They're going to peg it to a basket of various different, I don't know if it's currencies, stocks, bonds, stuff like that. They're going to peg it to some kind of some kind of economic basket.
What? He actually wants to ban vaping? That wouldn't surprise me. You know what's funny about the anti-vaping / smoking crowd? They're always ranting and raving about how evil big tobacco is secretly controlling everything and all that. And I'm like, really? Then how come smoking is banned in pretty much everywhere except your own personal house these days? Yeah, they're sure totally doing a good job of controlling us.
Yeah.
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 But they need a boogeyman. They need a boogeyman, and
that's like, I mean, if the NRA were a tenth as powerful as the left is making them out to be, there would be basically no gun laws in the country. But
well, the thing they ignore is that the NRA does actually support gun laws if the Republicans like them. So
yeah,
that's the problem. That's the reason why a lot of gun owners no longer like the NRA anymore, because it started out, as a good group, like when Charlton Heston was a member, but after that, basically they just became a shield for the Republican Party. And now if the Republican Party says, you know what, we're in favor of banning, these types of guns, they're like, okay, yeah, we can see that, whereas the GOA says, hell no.
Yeah, the NRA came out in favor of the bump stock ban and things like that. It's like, it's controlled opposition. It's controlled opposition.
Yeah, whereas the gun owners of America and other groups, they're like, hell no. Nope, no negotiation. If the military has access to it, civilians should have access to it.
Yeah, red flag laws from people who saw all of, what was the name of that movie? Minority Report, except for the last 10 minutes, and went, hey, that was a good idea.
Yeah. You know, it's the biggest. Yeah, actually, Shane. A lot of people have pointed this out. You know, what's the biggest? You know, what's the biggest plot hole that many people have pointed out about Minority Report is that if they truly could see the future, they wouldn't actually see the people committing the crime. They would see the person being arrested for committing the crime. But then again, people fail to realize that that's actually kind of the point, and it's heavily implied, I think, in the original book that they don't really actually can see the future per se. It's all just a bunch of bullcrap, and the big state, you know, that rules the society is just using them as justification, basically.
Well, and that was it. It's because there is no one future. You can choose not to do, even if there's no Minority Report at all. There you can choose not to commit the crime that they say you're going to commit. Absolute freedom. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Shane?
All right. I think we need to get you to turn your mic down a little bit, though.
Oh, yeah, that's my bad.
Yeah.
Shane, bad news. We're going to have to get the Civil War mentioned again because Nitro Tulo mentioned it.
The Bagaloo crowd? I'm not sure what he's talking about there. But this is something a lot of people are talking about. Tim Pool is talking about like that. Oh, yeah, there's going to be another civil war because, you know, of the left and what they're doing. I don't know.
I think I know what he's talking about. Bagaloo is sort of, it's basically a fancy code word for the Great Collapse. Some anarchists are calling it that. They're not calling it a collapse. I think they're just going to call it the Bagaloo, basically.
You mean like the collapse of the dollar and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's just the term they call for it, you know, and
yeah, I don't know. That doesn't really seem to be the crowd that's calling for violence. The crowd that's calling for violence is on, you know, the left and Antifa and all that.
It's pretty funny though, Shane. There was that one town in California that declared the NRA a domestic terrorist organization.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's funny. It's funny. The NRA has 5 million members. According to the Rand Corporation, there are something like 300,000 people in the world who are at risk of becoming radicalized and therefore might become terrorists. And here they have an order of magnitude more people like that they're saying are terrorists.
Yeah. And not to mention why, you know, it's so funny about how they turn away from Antifa and all that, because it's like, you know, look, I don't like the NRA either, because, you know, like I said, they're a shill for you know, the Republican Party, but still, I don't see them going around, you know, burning down buildings, macing people, breaking open skulls with bike locks because a political candidate they didn't like won.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the latest Proud Boys thing in Portland. Even after the Proud Boys left and they weren't even there, you know, Antifa was trying to find people, you know, to beat up and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. Also, I remember that one thing in Charleston, you know, where that guy ran over those people, and the narrative was for a long, long time was, you know, he did it as a deliberate attack. But then they actually took a look at it, and they revealed that he actually panicked because someone threw something at his window and broke the rear view window, and he swerved that because of the distraction.
How do you suggest that anarchists make a truly free land? Basically by making the alternatives, like cryptocurrency and things like that.
Yeah.
Make the alternatives to the state and just work on getting people to use them. And then, you know, you see how the state's panicking about cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Oh, you're from Germany,
Yeah.
Nitro too, lol. It's funny about Germany because I have heard from some German people that there's actually political groups that actually claim that it was unopposed freedom of speech that let the Nazis take over.
Yeah, it was San
No.
Francisco Armitage that declared the NRA a terrorist. Yeah. So agorism, yeah, basically agorism.
But yeah, seriously, freedom of speech is what led to the rise of the Nazis. You know what the funny irony is though, because I read a lot about the Nazis and all that. The politicians back then, they did everything that the modern day left did, you know, back in those days in that context. You know, they didn't have the internet, obviously, but they did that. They did everything to censor them, and it only created a Streisand effect and caused them to become more popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody. Yeah, here's a fun fact: nobody gave two freaking shits about Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party until the German government started trying to suppress them, and which resulted in the beer hall putsch.
Well, and it didn't help that this occurred at the time, when you had the hyperinflation and everything else, and the Nazis
Oh,
had,
yeah.
had something that they could find a scapegoat for. Oh, here's never let a good tragedy go to waste.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Here's another.
It also didn't help that he had his brown shirts as well, which, fun fact, is almost acts identical. Antifa acts almost identical to how Hitler's brown shirts were,
Oh yeah.
causing violence to anyone who disagrees with them, burning books and burning flags. The only difference was that Antifa is not fundamentally a Christian right-wing group that Hitler's brown shirts were. Same thing with Mussolini's black shirts.
Yeah, I jokingly made that comment one time. I was watching the South Park episode involving PC babies with some people, and it's like, oh, those PC babies are so cute. I know what to get them for their first birthday. Look, I got them all these nice little brown shirts. Yeah.
My name is the full name of
those shorts that go
TNT.
right above their knees too.
I thought TNT was trinitrotoluene. I don't think he's
Yeah,
like 3-nitro
Shane,
tolol. I don't know.
Yeah, Shane,
Don't quote me on that.
It's another historical irony that people fail to realize. Historically, the fascists and the Nazis actually were not the same politicals, and they actually hated each other initially.
Right,
Yeah.
they were just working together on World War II, just like the United States and the USSR were.
Yeah, and going back to the whole fascism versus National Socialism, a good example that often gets brought up is the fascist regime that was in control of Austria before it became annexed by Germany, and there's talks about, and people like to talk about how the Austro-fascists passed all these laws, to go after communists, but what they ignore was that those laws were actually written to go after Nazis. The
we're not going to be monetized now that we're talking about Nazis, because that's just how it works.
Who cares?
Yeah.
As long as we talk bad about it.
I'm pretty much figuring at this point none of the live streams are going to be monetized. That's just my assumption.
It wouldn't matter, Shane. It wouldn't matter, Shane. They're gonna figure out a way to demonetize it anyway. You might bring up Caitlyn Jenner, and at some point you might have referred to him he, and it's like, oh, you used the wrong pronoun. You're demonetized.
That's not even how it works, because I really don't think that there are actual people at YouTube that are saying that. It's these algorithms they're creating, but when you put your own learning into it, you put your own bias into the algorithms. And so, like, if you have Nazis that are associated with certain things, well, they must be against the Nazis, so they're fine. If you have Nazis, along with these other things, oh, well, they must be Nazis, and so we have to stop them.
Yeah, it's like they can't tell. It's like they can't tell the context. Like like you said, what happened, a couple years ago, where it was revealed that the algorithms were banning videos solely on the title, and there were a lot of people, that were making, jokes saying was Adolf Hitler and the Nazis a homosexual, and then the entire thing was just garbage of them talking about nonsense about how, oh, you know what I like to do on the summers? I like to do this. Oh, and did you hear about that new game that's coming out? That's awesome, and it's all bullshit and nonsense, but it's banned and demonetized based solely on the title.
Right, it's stuff that's even clearly satire.
Kind of reminds me about how the U.S. passes laws. It's like, did any of you guys actually read the bill?
Yeah.
I read the title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I would do, Shane, if I was president.
I had my secretary summarize it for me.
The focus group said I should vote for it, so.
Yeah, if I was president of the United States and I saw a bill like the one you described in that old video you did about the Constitution, I would have sent it back, and you know how they have a written agreement. It'd be like, what? President Hank Gardner vetoed the law. What was his reasoning for? Okay, dear Congress, I am vetoing this law because teal deer.
What?
Yep.
That's good.
Teal deer. Too long, didn't read, so I'm not approving it. Which, to be fair, that's not a bad argument, because, as Shane pointed out, if it's like hundreds of pages long, just for a simple little, issue, that usually means there's something in there that you probably don't want to be signing.
Well, the federal income tax is a very perfect example of that. It is thousands and thousands of paragraphs long.
Oh my God.
And it
Yeah.
is completely ridiculous. It's a monstrosity. And
The
it's getting
IRS
bigger
doesn't
every
even
day.
know what it said. They audited themselves, calling their own people and saying and
Oh,
asking
God.
them basic questions, and they got the wrong answer over half the time.
Yeah, actually,
it's like when they audited TSA and they failed every test.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, also reminds me of that one time, when the government was ranting about companies not taking financial responsibility, so a lot of these people dared, the US government, to come up with a proper, balance sheet and financial statement, and after years of bureaucracy, they're like, we can't properly do that.
So, okay, that's the German spelling then, the German version of trinitrotoluene. I'll just call him TNT. Riga says, aren't you shadow banned anyways? The thing about being shadow banned is you can't tell if you're shadow banned. But what I do know is when that whole thing started, within like a week,
So what I missed?
or maybe a little more. Hey, within like a week, my view counts got cut in half. And when I go into the statistics and I look at the amount of people coming from related videos or subscribing due to related videos, they are down to almost nothing. So I think some people are seeing them, but I mean, I've asked, put it in the comments if you came here from related videos. Haven't heard from anyone yet. So
yeah. By the
how
way,
you doing, Daniel?
By the way, Shane, about taxes, I was watching, I remember watching an old Schoolhouse Rock video, and they were talking about where the money goes, and there's a lyric, where the guy's like, we could stop paying income tax, but they might send me to jail. In the comic section, one person's like, that's completely incorrect. They might send you to jail, they will send you to jail.
Yeah. Well,
no, they'll demand you at gunpoint first, and then if you don't, they'll just shoot you.
Well, the thing is, they're going to wait until you rack up enough of a bill to make it worth doing so they won't lose money on it. So,
yeah.
And I mean, that's the thing about all these, scams about, oh, here's how you can get out of paying tax. Oh, I've done this for the last 5 years and nothing's happened. It's like, well, yeah, because they're waiting for you to get up, a couple $1 million or whatever.
Yeah, I mean... And another thing that the IRS can do, which I think is bull crap, is that they can literally freeze you. They can freeze you. You can find out that none of your cards are working, and you're like, why are none of my cards working? I'm all up to date and all that. And they're like, yeah, the IRS gave us a call and they froze all your assets.
Yeah. So I can skip taxes for a year. Okay, this is not advice. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not telling you not to pay your taxes. I'm just saying that in general, if you've been paying your taxes and then 1 year they don't hear from you, they're just going to assume that you forgot to file or, it got lost in the mail or whatever. And then if you pick up the next year, they'll probably overlook it because unless you're this zillionaire who owes, a bunch in taxes, they're not really going to pay attention to you. They're not going to come at you for, a $300 tax bill. Daniel, we're getting a lot of keyboard clicks from you, so you might want to turn your mic down there.
Yeah. Oh, but Shane, if we have to pay our taxes, why shouldn't they?
Yeah, that's the thing that really gets me about it. That's
the crab mentality.
That's where I first saw this effect that later on was called crab mentality. It was like what they do is when they go in there, they say, and they are totally not allowed to argue this. It goes against every principle of jurisprudence, but they do it anyway. They say, well, you have to pay your taxes. Why shouldn't the defendant? Why does he think he's better than you? And what I would do is I would turn it around. It's like, well, why should any of us have to pay taxes? And they won't let them argue that.
Yeah, and you know what, Shane? Going back to that whole thing, I pointed that out in the comic section. We actually see that a lot, with big businesses, like when the restaurants were suing food trucks and all that. They were suing food trucks, and the thing they were making the argument was, oh, we've got to pay all these taxes and rents and all these licenses, but these guys don't have to. So if we have to pay, why shouldn't they have to?
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that's a lie anyway. If you look at the CBO figures, the higher the income group you're in, the greater percentage of your income you pay in taxes. So yes, the highest quintile pays a greater percentage. The highest 10% pays an even greater percentage. The top 1% pays an even greater percentage.
Kind of reminds me of that. Kind of reminds me of that time when Peter Schiff went to Occupy Wall Street, and he was asking them, what do you think the 1% should be paying? They're like, well, they should be paying 15 or 20% of their taxes. And then he points out, you know what? You're advocating for a tax cut for the rich because the average 1%er pays about 35 to 50% in taxes. Like he was showing that out, you know.
And that's just on income taxes. That doesn't include that whole long list of other federal taxes I've read out in a few videos.
Yeah, you know, I mean, if you actually know what business law is, then you honestly can't blame, you know, the businesses for wanting to make their official headquarters in Ireland or the Cayman Islands, because there they don't have to pay all those ridiculous taxes, you know.
Yeah, what was the actual percentage with, you know, state and federal tax and in inflation? How much of your actual money is actually taken away as a result of federal and state policies?
It's really hard. It's really hard to say exactly, but usually it ends up being over half.
Yeah, you know,
when
Shane,
you include everything.
Yeah. You know, Shane, it kind of reminds me of the irony of the anti-tipping movement, you know, as me working as a Papa John's delivery driver, you know, and, you know, I understand why people don't like tipping, but the solutions they want for it are very stupid. They want the government to get involved, and it's like, yeah, if the government ends tipping, not only will a lot of people lose their jobs, the people that do get on board, yeah, they'll get that pay raise, but the government's just going to take more money from them, so it kind of defeats the purpose.
Well, that's really what it is, because government can't watch every single waitress and pizza delivery man watch every tip they get and, you know, click that shit into the system.
Right.
It's basically unfiltered money.
But the market has found solutions. If you go to the Freakonomics podcast, they have several episodes on tipping, and in one of them, they covered a restaurant chain in New York City that said, okay, we're going to have a no tipping policy. We're going to increase the menu prices of everything by 15%, and then you get revenue sharing for the amount of time that you work. And that gets split among both the wait staff and the kitchen staff. And so not only were they actually ended up making more money than they were before, they were also a lot happier because the waitresses there was a lot of animosity between them, and like a waitress didn't want to refill a drink from someone else's table when they weren't going to get the tip and stuff like that. And you know, they were saying, oh, well, you only got all those tips because you have big tits and stuff like that, which is probably true if you listen to the other episodes. But then you also have animosity between the wait staff and the kitchen staff, because the kitchen staff is like, well, we made the good food. Why don't we get that solved everything doing the revenue sharing.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a possibility. You know, like I said, I mean, again, I completely understand why people don't like tipping, and to a certain extent, I don't really like the system because, you know, I'm tired, you know, about having to deliver, to some guy far away, you know, half across the city, you know, in a snowstorm, and he only gives me like $1 or $2, you know, and it's like, really?
Yeah, the spare change.
Yeah. That's something that really grinds my gears, though, Shane. You know, like, again, I understand why people don't like tipping, and I understand, you know, the point of it all, but it really just grinds my gears, like, when you drive, like, half across the entire town in, like, a severe storm and all that, and you deliver to a guy who has a really big house, and he's got 3 really fancy cars in his driveway, and he only gives you $1. It's like, wow. I mean, I'm not asking for half your money or anything, but it's like, seriously, all you can spare me is $1?
Yeah, finding a job that pays in non-taxable ways and someone else says to use crypto, this is really bizarre, and I don't think even the government knows how it works. But like, if you have a job that you get paid in stock options, the way I think it works, and don't quote me on this, is that you get paid the stock options, you don't pay taxes on it until you sell the stock, and then you pay the money that you got selling the stock. Supposedly, crypto is considered the same thing. The question is, you know, if you get paid in crypto, then yeah, if you go to an exchange and sell it for dollars, you have taxes on the dollar. But what if you're buying stuff with the crypto? How does that work? Do you owe taxes on that? I'm sure the government's going to say you owe taxes on it.
Yeah, crypto's like magnets. How do they work?
Well, and okay, Venezuela is probably one of the most terrible countries in the world. But at least they passed a law that made sense. They said, whatever you're getting paid in, you know, whether it's, what is it, the Bolivar or Dash or dollars or whatever. Whatever you're getting paid in, you pay taxes in that. So if you get paid in dollars, you give them that percentage of dollars. If you get paid in Dash, you give them that percentage of Dash. At least that makes sense and you can understand it.
Yeah. Actually, Shane, it's pretty funny. I actually saw a video about making about the war on drugs and prostitutes and all that, and I heard the reason why we have these vice crime laws. It's not because the practices are immoral, because historically people have been okay with drug dealing, gambling, and prostitution for many centuries. The problem occurred when it became so the government was it was much more difficult for the government to tax it, and when the government largely basically more or less couldn't get money out of taxes without some sort of government force, they basically said, well, that's it then. Then all vice is illegal unless you pay taxes.
Yeah, Rika says I used to work for tips. I have no problem tipping accordingly. The minimum wage for services way lower. It's like, yeah, but if you have, like I said, with the revenue sharing model, you take care of that.
Rika,
Whoa, loud, Daniel, way loud.
Sorry.
Turn your volume way down.
Sorry.
Volume way down.
I had to fucking move my mic away.
Oh man.
Sorry.
Oh,
Scared the shit out of me.
Turn volume down, volume way down. But yeah, I don't see why you should make your customers compensate for the fact that you don't pay your workers enough. Pay your workers well, and then don't make your customers worry about it. Because I can't even keep track of who I'm supposed to tip anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, to be fair, the government is largely to blame for the tipping culture to begin with, because
Is my volume better?
Down more.
A little bit more.
Because if I recall correctly, not only do wait staff and delivery driver not have to register their tips, neither does the restaurant, so it just makes them easier. But like I said, if we just go with what people want and we just ban tips but don't actually come up with a market solution to it, then all that's going to happen is.
Sorry, how's my volume now?
It could stand to go down a little more. It's better, but it could still go down a little more.
Okay. How about now?
That's better.
Okay.
Anyway, I was gonna say, Rika, if you're interested in kind of getting involved directly, you're on the co-host list. So
yeah, you can come into the voice chat, Rika.
Don't hesitate to come into voice chat.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder where the tipping industry started. I don't remember this, but they covered that in one of the freaking. Go to the Freakonomics podcast page. I forget what the URL is. Search for Freakonomics podcast. Go to the webpage and search for tipping and listen to all of those. They are great episodes.
Adam Ruins Everything also did one on the video, but my disapproval with that video was that he placed a little more most of the blame on the business. When I'm pretty sure from what I've read, the government played a big role in the tipping culture. Basically,
Yeah, because tipping didn't even exist. It's only like a little more than 100 years old or something.
Actually, if I recall correctly, the concept of tipping actually came out of Prohibition, because bootleggers, at speakeasies had to be very careful with how much they spent their money, because if they were spending all this money at once, that would make them suspicious. So they invented the tipping way as a means of covering up their operations.
I think it does predate Prohibition, though. I think it's before that, but I don't remember. I've
heard multiple things on it.
Well, tipping's always been around, but historically it was only for if they were providing really, really good service. Like, the wait staff was treating you like a king, they were talking to you, and they were acting like a person.
Actually, originally, if you go back thousands of years, it's if they were doubling as a prostitute, basically.
Oh.
you tip them for that extra service, yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, yes, the red light district.
Well, they didn't have red lights back in those days, but yeah.
Reminds me of that line from Reservoir Dogs where they're asking Mr. Pink why he's not tipping. He's like, yeah, she was nice, but she wasn't anything special. Mr. Blue's like, what do you mean by special? She takes you out to the back and sucks your dick? Yeah.
Hey, if you're in ancient Rome, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Too much tea.
Here's another fun fact that's ironically that I read about. Apparently, the Catholic Church was okay with prostitution for quite a while.
Yeah, everyone was. It wasn't this big thing, and it was kind of a low class thing to do. You wouldn't see a proper lady do that, but
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't looked like, it wasn't, smiled upon, but it wasn't frowned upon either. I mean, historically, they viewed, sex as, the same as drinking alcohol. It's a necessary
Well, for
evil,
a
and if you
long
do it
time,
to
it was a legitimate market.
Yeah.
immoral
Oh
and
yeah.
sinful. But
Well,
but if you,
and like the Venus de Milo, the recent theory on that, because that wasn't a statue of Venus. That was just what the guy who discovered it in the 19th century called it. But
Oh.
she was found without the arms, so the question is, what are her arms doing? And people have come up with all sorts of crazy, unnatural position for her arms to be in. We're still getting some typing from you, Daniel. So if you could turn it down or mute it, turn it down some more, or mute it or something like that. But anyway, the only one, at least that I've seen, and this is getting a lot of acceptance in the larger art community, because it's the only one that doesn't have her arms in these crazy, unnatural positions, is that she's spinning. And so the way you spun cloth is that or thread, was that you had your left arm way up and your right arm was down across from that, and the spinner was underneath, and you just kept spinning it around like that. And that's a perfectly natural position for that to be in. And the thing is, in ancient Rome, spinning was what prostitutes did in between jobs to make extra money. So in all probability, the Venus de Milo was actually a prostitute.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Actually, Shane, I'm working on, some stories and all that, and I thought of one little joke I would put in one of my stories is one of the characters has a brother who's an art prodigy, and he loves painting pictures, and he's getting in trouble in school because he's quote unquote painting pornography again. And the teacher's like, "You are painting pornography that is demeaning to women," and the kid's like, "I wasn't painting porn. I was trying to recreate the painting of the birth of Venus." Yeah.
Yeah, the Botticelli, yeah.
Yeah, you never seen a naked woman? You never seen a naked woman being born from a clam before?
Well, that's like, they have all of those, the Neolithic and even Paleolithic statues of, all the big boobs and, big, upright schlongs and stuff like that. And they were saying, yes, these were their fertility gods and goddesses that they worshipped. I'm like, no, it's porn.
Yeah,
it was their porn. Come on.
Actually, this does tie into an argument I've just been having with a friend who argues that, say, depicting fan service that makes a character where the character is clearly uncomfortable as titillating is basically this huge moral red flag that the author is some sort of evil sex offender, or that we should be constantly on the alert for. Constantly on the alert for implications that every author might be a Nazi.
That's kind of like what they were saying about like Edgar Allan Poe. Oh, he was secretly a murderer and he wanted to commit murder. No, he was a writer and he was using his imagination to create stories.
Yeah, by that, yeah.
But he's also saying, oh, our imagination is limited to what we know and believe. So,
well, then how does science
if that's
fiction
the case,
and
I wonder what
fantasy
they thought of Lovecraft.
Can I say something now? By that logic, then Charles Dickens is pro child slavery and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
because he wrote a lot of stories about children getting beaten up and basically put into indentured servitude and all that. I mean.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, the thing is, and that's another thing too about why that red flag makes no sense, because what if, the person writing the story is putting a character in that situation to demonstrate a problem? Like, like going back to Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist, based on, the things he saw when he was, a young child worker, and he saw all these poor kids, as young as 10 or 12, being forced, to work these long, horrible hours because the government, more or less, put their parents in prison for taxes or whatnot,
Well, I mean, this is just bad writing, and we're seeing it today with the latest Star Wars movies. We saw it back in Star Trek Voyager. This idea that you can't let your heroic characters have any problems or any flaws or any downsides or any demons or whatever. They have to all be perfect all the time, and
no, they can't.
Yeah, easily some of the best stories around are the ones where the hero has a flaw and it's very much part of their story, and they seek to overcome it.
Well, and
that's what makes the greatest stories.
Thing. That's the thing that drives me crazy about the whole Greedo shooting first thing, because Han just shooting Greedo out of the blue like that. I mean, yeah, Greedo gave him every reason to, but he wasn't like about to shoot him or anything like that. It establishes Han Solo as being this amoral rogue in this era, in this culture where, you know, life is cheap and meaningless, and you know, he only joins the heroes for the money. But then over the course of the movie, he becomes a hero himself. Yeah. And, you know, that's character progress right there.
Oh, another
Which
good
I've
example.
I've actually looked at a bunch of videos and stuff talking about how the Han Solo and the Force Awakens and whatnot, they basically destroyed any sort of character progression that Han Solo had in the original trilogy.
They did the same to Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
That's the thing that people hate
Mark
about
Hamill
the
came out and said, there's no way that this is Luke Skywalker. And Disney phoned him and said, "Shut the fuck up."
That's what he said. That's what he said in an interview. In an interview, he was reading the script, and apparently he approached Rian Johnson. And he said, "Yeah, I read the script, and you must really hate Luke Skywalker."
You all called me crazy. you all called me crazy back in 14.
Well, that's because at the time Disney, you know. Well, I will say because back in those days, Disney wasn't woke, you know, and like I said, if they got rid of the expanded universe, but it replaced it with a different one that was still pretty good in its own right, then I could live with that. You know, the problem that I have with modern Star Wars is what they did now. It's like, you know, and the thing is, Shane, it actually ruins all the other products because it's like, you know, from what I've heard, there is some good Disney canon material out there, but I'm like, it doesn't matter because those actions don't matter because of the new movies, because that's ultimately what's going to happen. So it's like, all this cool bad stuff the Rebel Alliance did, it's for nothing.
And it's all tied in with, you know, them drumming out John Lasseter and all like that. And I mean, say what you will about that guy, he knows how to tell a good story.
Yeah, and you know, not to be fair, you know, in the original expanded universe, yeah, you know, the New Republic made some mistakes and all that, and there was the Yuzon Vong War and all that, but here's the thing, there actually was a reason for them coming in, and it was a steady buildup. It wasn't just, you know, everything's just okay and all that, then suddenly out of nowhere, this rogue group has this massive super weapon and it blows everything up, that means they win.
Well, and it's like they get all these people in there and they're like, oh, well, we have to make sure we get writers that are, you know, in tune with social justice and everything else. It's like, okay, fine, but why can't you find any good writers that are in tune with social justice?
Yeah, as soon as I saw Kathleen Kennedy wear a shirt, that says "The Force is female," my first thought was, oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
It's pretty
They're
funny
gonna turn the fucking Star Wars franchise feminist, and that's exactly what they did with Rey. She's just this uber badass right off the bat. She knew more about the Millennium Falcon than Han Solo did, having never flown it ever, and Han having had it for years. Even if it had disappeared for say like a decade or two, Han Solo should know that ship upwards, backwards, and sideways.
Oh yeah,
he knows every single compartment, and yet she's just like, I just tore out this one piece, and now the Millennium Falcon works. No.
And it's supposed to be like the hardest ship in the galaxy to fly, you know?
Yeah,
and she just fucking like perfectly aims a fixed turret at a fucking TIE fighter.
Yeah, and you know what's another thing I don't like about Rey when they're talking about lightsaber combat is people saying, oh, well, the reason why Rey's so good at lightsaber combat is because she's good with her, you know, staff, so she must have that. It's like, those are two completely different weapons. That's like saying, because you know how to use a spear, that means you know how to use a sword. No, they're two completely different weapons.
I practice HEMA. I can tell you now, there is a huge difference between a longsword, which is what the original lightsaber was made after, and a staff.
Yeah.
Huge difference. It doesn't translate.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, Daniel.
Sorry. I had a trouble kind of breaking through that.
Okay.
But
it's what you have to do with this crowd. You know that.
I took issue as early as when I saw her take a TIE fighter to actually escape to a planet. There's no way you could reasonably escape on like a short-range fighter with no shielding whatsoever.
Especially if it doesn't have any way to maneuver in an atmosphere or land or anything like that. All it can do is dock with the ship.
Yeah, and the thing is, you know, they try to fix it by saying, "Oh, well, the First Order TIE fighters, you know, have life support systems and shields." Well, here's the thing, and I think it's established in canon too. The reason why the Empire didn't put them on there was because the ship itself was already pretty complicated and expensive to make, and they figured, well, you know, our ships have really powerful weaponry and they're really fast and maneuverable, so our pilots will just rely, you know, on their speed and maneuverability to dodge enemies and projectiles, so that will make it enough. And you know, and that's another thing I don't get about the First Order. They're like supposed to be just a quasi, you know, paramilitary group that initially only has like maybe a few 100,000, maybe a million or so members. Yet they have machines that are far superior than what the Empire had.
Well, that's the thing is that they basically The Force Awakens was a copy and paste of A New Hope, while simultaneously giving the finger to the original trilogy fans.
Yeah,
because
like...
first of all, if these rebellion, which became the Resistance, is somehow working with the galactic government at the time, why are they just the Resistance? Why are they not considered the Republic military?
Yeah,
I can understand them using the same ships and stuff like that, but would they not have a greater force than, I don't know, like eight fucking X-Wings to take on Starkiller Base, which is what, like almost 30 times bigger than the original Death Star was? Are you shitting me?
It's a funny thing I saw one time. I saw it a long time ago. It was they're about to use Starkiller Base, but before they can use it to destroy the Galactic Republic, they're like, sir, if we destroyed the star, which is the main force of gravity, what's keeping us in orbit?
Yeah.
And then they basically start flying out of nowhere, and they become a rogue planet, and then they crash into another planet. You know.
Yeah, the sun disappears.
They freeze to death.
Fucking bolted in one direction.
A rogue planet.
Yeah, then it's like from Spaceballs, you know, it's like, oh god, what did I do? My brains are going into my... I mean, seriously,
but it's like they're doing the same thing that, and there was this movie that I think it was still Dapperton, but Cinema Scum did, that was like this martial arts movie that portrayed martial arts as being about toxic men and masculinity and all of this horrible stuff, and you know, and it's like it's the same thing, you know. They're trying to do with, and people
not knowing that some of the most famous martial arts were female. They were female.
And the thing is, in pretty much every philosophy of martial arts that I'm familiar with, it's about balancing the male and the female inside you, and finding the right balance between the two.
It's strength and gentleness at the same time.
Actually,
right.
Going back
sometimes
to that,
you want to be the rock that can withstand everything. Sometimes you want to be the river that can flow around.
Yeah, well, yeah, Bruce Lee was famous for that. He said a river can flow and it can crash.
Mm-hmm.
You can either
over time,
or destroy something.
And over time, it can wear down the rock.
And 246 Trino Mental Bin said spears aren't every way better than a sword. Well, here's a fun fact about that, because you know people like to portray, you know, knights in shining armor as using swords as their thing, but historically, I'm pretty sure you would know this, Freedom, since you practice HEMA. Swords were actually seen at kind of like pistols today. They were seen as self-defense weapons, not as an actual weapon you'd want to go on the battlefield with. You know, if you're a knight,
a lot of knights would mainly use blunt force weapons, warhammers, maces. That kind of thing, because a lot of times they were facing other knights.
Well, and I would think if you're facing a knight with armor or something like that, instead of like, you know, a broadsword where you go from the side and try to slice, I would think you'd want a stabbing weapon, you know, with a point that can actually pierce the armor.
Yeah, they actually did, and actually, Shane, they did have swords called arming swords, which were invented for that sole purpose. They were swords that were incredibly thin and very stiff, and you know, if you try to use them like in a heroic, you know, sword duel, they would break apart. But that's not the point. The point is when you're fighting an opponent, if you knock them down, you're supposed to slip it between the crevices in their armor, and you're supposed to aim for the joints or the groin or even the visor if you can.
Right. Well, yeah, just a lot of those the really pointy weapons, they just they were used. That's not under any dispute. But just blunt weapons were simply just more proficient when it comes to facing full plate armor, and it didn't take as much dexterity to smack someone in the face with a fucking hammer than you have to, like a viper, go for the eyes. Like you have, it's just you could have basic infantry, arm them with warhammers, which were actually much cheaper to make than swords because they were mainly just wood shafts and then a big hunk of metal at the end.
That's another thing. That's another thing too. Swords were ridiculously expensive back in those days. Like there was one
it was
guy. There was
mainly
one,
nobility.
There was a
the
medieval.
sword was meant as a ceremonial thing for a lot of the times, or for dueling.
Yeah, actually, there was one European historical guy, who knew a thing or two about him and all that, but he said, that a sword, like it would cost like, like a couple hundred gold coins, and if we were to take that today and adjust it for inflation, that would be the equivalent of a sports car.
Yeah, well, that's why, especially in Viking culture, that the sword is basically just held above all weapons, because it was just so expensive, and really only the wealthiest of warriors could have them.
And now there were swords.
The most prevalent weapons were axes and hammers, just because of how easy it was to make, supply, and to use them compared to a sword.
And they're also more versatile, because you were talking about using blunt force. With an axe, you can do with the sharp end if you want to try to pierce something, or flip it around and hit them with the blunt end and do it either way.
Yeah. A lot of axes had that. A lot of the halberds had that. They had that really big, slashing point.
The most versatile weapon in history.
That was for like, going after horses or lightly armored opponents. The tip at the end was for going after an armored opponent, and it had a stub or a spike on the back, and that was for dismounting an enemy.
What was that you were saying, Absolute?
The halberd, definitely the most versatile weapon in history. In regards to horsemen, there was a specific weapon, I can't remember the name of it. Birch hook, Butch, I don't know. It starts with a B.
Bill hook?
Bill hook, thank you. That one was extremely prolific at just ripping dudes off horses, because essentially you had a dude running at you with a horse at 15, 20 miles an hour, and you smack him with that.
Zero wants to know, swords were expensive, huh? How much do swords cost now? Well, the reason they were so expensive back in those days was because they were much more difficult to make, because they, today they're you can buy them relatively cheap, and they're like good quality. Like you could theoretically use them as a weapon, though it's not practical because we have much better, metal smithing idea. But back in those days, it could take weeks and even months to make a sword, because you had to get enough of the steel, you had to get enough of the carbon, you had to press it by a hammer, and that could take, days and weeks, contrary to what TV shows show. It doesn't take it, the guy takes a block of armor, he smashes it down, and by the next day he has a beautiful sword. It actually took far longer than that.
Well, and also in Europe,
depending on the metal.
In Europe at the time, you could not get good European steel. You had to go to a different continent. They got a lot of it actually from West Africa, because for some reason that area of the world, they were just able to make really good steel there. So steel was hard to come by.
They had a very good method of making it. They made what was called a crucible, whereas essentially it was a one-time furnace that they used, where it was bricks and clay all together, and they would have, I think it's 2 different types of steel and then charcoal on top of that, and that would essentially take all of the, I can't remember, it's called slag. It's all the impurities, like dirt and sedimentary rock and stuff like that. They would draw all that out, and that was what you would get, what's known today as Damascus steel.
Yep.
And the Vikings, who at their height had trading routes going all the way down into the Arabic nations at the time, and they brought back this Damascus steel, and that's what created a series of swords, which are known as Uthbert swords, which were made of Damascus steel. These are very famous swords. They were essentially, the whole thing around it was, if you had an Uthbert sword, you were blessed by the gods to never fall in battle.
No, JC Armitage, Japan did not have lower quality steel than the Europeans. I saw an interesting video on this. The Japanese actually had superior quality steel to the Europeans. The problem was that their forging techniques were inferior, so they couldn't really utilize them.
They could make
some
the
of the best
steel,
swords
but they
in
couldn't
Japan
really.
Were made by Masamune.
Yeah.
Though if you can actually find someone who's selling a Masamune sword, those things can go for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And actually, JC Armitage also pointed out, like, IP laws. That was actually another thing that kept swords expensive, was because they actually had heavy regulations back in those days involving swords, not about who could own them, but rather who could manufacture them. And in many cases, you couldn't make a sword unless you had a guild stamp on it, you know.
Yeah, you had to be a guild member, yeah. Well, and he's talking about today, you know, why weapons cost so much in this era. I was seeing something that's like, if you basically buy any firearm, 90% of the cost of that is going to be either taxes or regulatory compliance of some kind.
I had a conversation with the Cabela's employee that that said, the overwhelming majority of these guns, they're far less mechanically complicated than what's in your computer. And you could easily sell a lot of these guns, for half that price and still make a profit. But because of all the rules and regulations, you got to pay the taxes, you got to hire people to look at those taxes, and it drives the cost up, I mean, that's why a computer that has far more rare materials and complicated machines than a gun does. That's why a computer, you can get a decent computer for less than $300. Yet a gun, even a basic gun, can cost you $500. It's because of the rules.
Yeah, and in regards to swords back in medieval times too, it really, depending on what country you were in, it also was illegal for certain people to have swords. Like in feudal Japan, you were not allowed to have a sword during certain periods, and you couldn't, and especially common citizens were not allowed to carry more than one sword on them. The whole
that's why you had
was specifically for samurai.
Yeah, that's why you have all these weird looking weapons that the ninja were using, because they were taking things like farm implements and refashioning them into
they were farm tools. And actually, if I recall correctly, some kingdoms in feudal Japan even had laws that flat out said a peasant couldn't even touch a sword. So if you saw a sword on the ground, you dare not pick it up, even if you're trying to return it to its owner, because if you were to pick it up and track down the samurai and say, "Hey, I found your sword," he'd cut your head off, because that was a dishonor. You were not to touch an elegant weapon like that.
Well, it also in regards to samurai, their weapons were their soul. They connected to their weapon. So essentially, if someone below a samurai touched their sword, you had essentially desecrated their soul.
I will say one thing I did like about that old, largely garbage TV show Deadliest Warrior. One thing I liked about their samurai episode is that it debunked, a common myth that a lot of people had, that samurai only went into battle with katanas. Oh no, they had far more weapons than the katana.
Weren't they primarily spearmen and bowmen?
Yeah,
they were originally the original class was bowmen, and then as war started to evolve in Japan, they were then, like a lot of feudalistic European knights, they were mainly horsemen.
Yeah,
it was really only the really poor samurai that stayed on the ground a lot.
And by the 17th century, they actually were largely musketeers, because that's when they had access to to Dutch arquebuses, and they were actually, if I recall correctly, they were one of the few people in the early days of Japan that were allowed to carry guns.
Yeah, from what I recall, the sword
Portuguese for that.
From what I recall, the sword was practically a last resort in most to all cases.
Yeah.
Yeah, and something by the 15th century or something.
It was ceremonial.
And by like the 15th century or something like that, they were basically worshipped as, if not gods, then at least, high priests or something.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw this video by Top Tens. It was one of their lesser cringier episodes about samurais. And actually, this is also a thing that's brought up about knights, is that one thing that often gets ignored about samurais and knights is that they weren't wandering around, rescuing damsels and going on quests. They were often serving their lord. And very, very often, their job was basically a glorified tax collector.
Yeah.
That's basically
a lot of people actually don't know about the samurai too, is that some of the methods that would essentially promote the samurai in rankings, especially during times of war, was really fucked up. A lot of people don't know that samurai were headhunters. They would cut off the head of any opponent that they defeated and show it to their lord in hopes of increasing their status. And especially during times where there were long battles, it would even resort to taking noses.
Oh, and actually going back to the samurai, people talk about how samurai had this code of honor and all that, but the thing is, their code of honor was to their lord, and so it didn't matter, so but he was morally at the time required to follow his lord. So if his lord, said, "You know what, I'm feeling bored. I want you to go to a rival village and I want you to decapitate every single baby you see," a samurai would do it.
Yeah.
without question,
there was definitely some historical writings talking about how there were actually samurai convicted by higher lords because their daimyo would tell them to go slaughter villages, and they would collect the trophies of sometimes women and sometimes even children.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, they were even doing that. I guess technically the samurai thing was quote unquote over, but it was still there in World War II, and this was a big problem in Guam because the Guamanians weren't really fighting on either side, but they were just kind of in the middle. And yeah, the U.S. committed a lot of atrocities in Guam, but Japan would the Japanese soldiers would basically just find as many Guamanians as they could and just chop their heads off for trophies.
Same thing happened in China. Yeah, that's a thing I love doing to some Japanese when they try to shame the United States about the atomic bombs. It's just bring up Nanjing, yet tell them, yeah, you guys killed more people in Nanjing than both atomic bombs combined. So, it's like if I recall correctly, the total amount of people killed, including counting the people that died from medical causes caused by the radiation, about 160,000. And the number of people killed in Nanjing, China is anywhere from 200,000 to 250,000.
Well, 600,000 were killed in the Civil War.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really is just what the nuclear bomb was. It was primarily a scare factor.
Yeah.
Well, they were showing off. They were showing off to Russia. That's what they were doing.
Yeah.
They were saying, "Ooh, we're big and scary. Don't mess with us."
That's actually the reason why it was chosen, was because they did agree that they had to terrorize Japan, but they were divided on should we use the atomic bombs or should we just continue the fire bombings, and they chose the atomic bomb because not only did they believe it would force Japan to surrender, but it would also serve a secondary purpose of showing the USSR, hey, look, we've got this bomb that can blow up your country. Your country, don't mess with it. So Truman thought, hey, let's kill two birds with one stone.
Well, and the thing of it is, they were like, oh, well, they had to take out Japan's weapons manufacturer. They had pretty much already done that. They went after Hiroshima and Nagasaki because they had basically been untouched by the war. And the reason why they were untouched is they weren't making weapons and stuff like that.
Well, Nagasaki was chosen as a last resort. The original city, I can't pronounce its name. It begins with a K, Hiroshima. But... Oh. No, it wasn't Hiroshima. It was a different one. They were
Kashiwazaki.
They were flying over it, but it was very cloudy that day. So, so they're like, we can't hit the target. So they're like, well, then go to a different city. Well, they went there, but the weather was bad, so they couldn't do that. And they're like, we're running out of fuel. What should we do? It's like, well, head back, but Nagasaki's on the way. Just drop the bomb at Nagasaki, then immediately head back.
Rika says the war was over when they nuked Japan. Well, it wasn't over, but yeah, Japan had been trying to surrender, and the only condition they wanted was they wanted Hirohito to stay on the throne, and the Allies were like, no, we got to have unconditional surrender, and so they nuked him, and they surrendered unconditionally, and they let Hirohito stay on the throne.
Yeah, that's the reason why wars, become so bloody. It's not because, it's like... when I bring up, the atrocities committed by the Soviet Union and all that, they're like, yeah, but the Germans were invading Russia and doing all this. And it's like, what would you have done? Simple. Once the Germans are out of Russia, you stop pursuing them. The reason why wars get so bloody is because the politicians are like, oh no, we can't just repel them. We got to march on their capital. We got to burn it down. We got to rape their women, kill their children, enslave their men. We got to make sure that they never fight us again, but all that ends up doing is creating resentment, and then 10, 20, 30 years later, they come back,
Yeah, when the other side wants to stop fighting, stop fighting. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Well, I think what it was the pursuit of the unconditional surrender. I think what it was sort of like, it's sort of like the United States government showing the U.S. people like, see, we got revenge for Pearl Harbor, ta-da!
Well, that too. I mean, they attacked Pearl Harbor and people wanted blood,
Yeah.
That's
really what it was.
It kind of reminds me.
And like even today, people still say that Pearl Harbor was a sneak attack when Japan actually used 3 different methods of transmission to warn them that the attack was coming because they wanted to make sure they got the warning.
Yeah, and here's another funny thing. There was actually an old TV show by Indiana Jones that was called The Adventures of Young Indiana Jones, starring Sean Patrick Flannery. It's actually really good, and it shows Indy where he travels to Europe and joins the Belgian army under an assumed name so he can fight in World War I. And there was an episode where they're being ordered to charge, this heavily fortified, position that's by the Germans, even though the Germans have the entire area littered with machine guns and big Bertha cannons that would completely wipe them out. And even when he brings that information to them, Papa Joffre of the French military is like, I don't care, I want an attack. And they're like, why do you want an attack? Why do you want an attack? We're all going to get wiped out anyway. He's like, it doesn't matter. That area is historically German French area. When the Germans took that, the people became outraged. And when the people are outraged, the politicians have problems. And when the politicians have problems, I have a problem. So basically, it was just a... What?
Well, look at the actual history.
The war on terror just kept on going because they were like, "Oh, remember 9/11? Remember 9/11?" and then just tossing bodies at the Taliban.
Well, look at the actual history of
a lot of the war on terror was just straight. It was just straight propaganda fuel. I think everyone in the country knows that George W. Bush would not have been elected again if it were not for his propaganda on the war on terror.
Well, look at the actual history around the Cuban Missile Crisis. Basically, the generals wanted a nuclear war with Russia, and it was Kennedy who finally said, "No, wait, this isn't worth that. Let's just..."
Both sides. Both sides wanted blood. Both sides wanted blood. The generals wanted to nuke Russia. The Russians wanted to nuke the United States, and
everyone except for Khrushchev and Kennedy.
And that one Soviet officer. Now, contrary to what some communists love to say, he didn't say, "Oh no, we shouldn't nuke the United States. That's wrong." No, what he actually said was, "Well, let's not be irrational. Let's actually try to contact Moscow first, and unless there's a reason to do so, let's not launch." Whereas the captain just wanted to say, "Oh, we're under attack. Let's launch the nuke." Whereas he said, "No, let's try to contact them first." He wasn't saying let's not nuke the U.S. He's just saying let's wait, and he was right to do so because when they surfaced, they got in contact with Moscow and they said, "Don't engage the U.S. forces. Just move away. We're in negotiation with them."
Right, and it's interesting what you were saying, Absolute, about George W. Bush. Daniel, we're getting some typing noises from you, so if you could, turn that volume down. But it's interesting that government is here to protect us, and the military protects us, and all of this stuff, they're there to protect us. What is 9/11 but a huge failure of them to protect us? But what was everyone's response to that? Oh, yay, George Bush! Let's give the highest approval rating ever to the president because government didn't protect us like they were supposed to. I mean, talk about rewarding failure.
Although to George W. Bush's defense, the terrorist attacks that occurred were retaliatories for attacks that were carried out by the Clintons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I saw a joke like that one time. Where it shows by a bunch of angry jihadists, and they're surrounded by him, and they're saying, why did you bomb our villages and towns? And Clinton's like, I didn't do that. Then he points at George W. Bush. He did it.
You're talking about
really
false flags.
Just fucking throw it off.
Yeah, talking about false flags there in the chat. Yeah, that was something else that, and I don't think Kennedy was the only one, but there were like several times in Kennedy's administration it's come out, in FOIA documents and stuff like that, where they wanted to do false flags. They wanted to, like bomb a city in Florida and blame it on the Russians. And Kennedy was like, "What? Are you crazy? No, we're not doing that."
It was the Cubans.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah, but the Cubans
as long as it
were.
furthers the self-interest, any price is necessary.
The irony too is that the Bay of Pigs invasion, the biggest irony is that it actually strengthened Castro, because from what I read, when Castro took power, there were a lot of people that were doubting him, and almost instantly Cuba's communist policy was failing, and Castro was desperate and he was on his last political legs. But then the U.S. tried to invade and he repelled them, and then his party was like, "Oh, see, Castro kept those evil imperialist Americans away, so you have to keep him in power, because if you don't, the Americans are going to come and take us over." And the people are like, "Yeah, can't argue with that."
Yeah, I mean, if it hadn't been for the Cuban Missile Crisis and everything coming up around that, it's unlikely the Castro regime would have lasted any length of time at all. How you doing, Esso?
Yeah, you know.
Hey there.
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. I just
okay. Your mic is hot.
I read as you were talking about.
Your mic is hot, Esso. You need to turn it down a bit. Because I can't adjust your volumes individually. I can only adjust it for everyone, and you're a bit louder than everyone. Yeah. Nothing personal. We had to get Daniel to turn his way down too.
Actually, Shane, you know what else is ironic about the Cuban Missile Crisis? There's a lot of military historians and logistic officers that have said that, in all honesty, in hindsight, if you remove hindsight, the Bay of Pigs invasion actually could have worked because Castro's military wasn't very powerful, and they were mostly using World War II era weapons, whereas the Cuban exiles had some fairly sophisticated American weapons. The problem was that the U.S. Air Force that was supposed to support them got the time zones wrong, so they flew over the wrong area, and by the time they got the area, they were told, oh, all those exiles were surrounded and captured. Oh, shit.
Is that better? But
could probably go down a little more. Yeah, but yeah, that's a lot better.
Yeah, the thing is, I live in Florida, so of course I have there's a lot of people that live around me that are immigrants from Cuba and fled Castro's regime. And it's really amazing how when Fidel Castro finally fucking croaked, that there were, of course, all of these Cubans who were like, yes, finally, the guy who's driven us from our homes is finally dead. And so many college-age socialists were like, actually...
Yeah, like there were people
Castro was actually a really good guy.
Yeah,
yeah.
But I mean, then his brother took over, or his son, or something.
Yeah.
I think. One of the other guys,
Raul
Castro. Yeah, and I mean, he just ended up being exactly the same.
Yeah, they pulled the classic. Yeah, they pulled the classic. Oh well, we can't change from a communist to a market society. People will go and kill each other,
and they'll starve in the street and all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
It really is amazing how every socialist country, every time they're like, "Oh yeah, we're for the people," and yet it's always this very, very small group of people that end up leading the country every time, whether it's families or political allies.
You know, it's funny. It's funny because, you know, they said the same thing about Russia in the 90s. You know, they're like, see, the 1990s in Russia is proof that free markets don't work because the Russians implement them and everyone killed each other. Yet here's
the Bernie Sanders thing, it's breadline.
But here's what I read about. I read that the Soviet Union disbanded because, believe it or not, the Soviet Union wasn't, you know, economically collapsing when it disbanded. It was actually kind of sort of stable at that point, but they were predicting within the next couple years we're going to fall apart, and there's evidence that shows that they disbanded. You know, basically the whole purpose was, okay, we'll disband right now, so that way when that economic collapse comes, we'll say, oh, see, we were wrong, and then we'll just rebuild the Soviet Union again. But they didn't expect one man, and that was Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. there was a thing I read, and I can't remember where it was. I think it was Fee, but he was talking about how during the time of the height of the Soviet Union, that even the poorest person in the United States actually made more money than the average Russian citizen did because of the social policy.
I've heard before that it was the grapes of wrath.
Your mic is still pretty hot, Daniel. See if you can notch it down a little more.
Mic's better now.
But anyway, you were saying about the grapes of wrath?
It was the grapes of wrath that was, I believe, banned in the Soviet Union.
There were a lot of books banned in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, there was a lot.
I'm talking about the movie specifically. And the reason was that it depicted even the poorest Americans owning cars.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because the Soviet Union was doing what North Korea was doing. You know, when people are saying, "Oh, we're so miserable and the city's ugly," and all, it's like, yeah, but at least you have a job and a loaf of bread. In America, everyone's eating each other because they have no food.
Yeah, what I can't remember what it was. Is an Asian communist country. I think it was China. I could be wrong, but in one of the Asian communist countries, apparently Winnie the Pooh is banned because
China.
Oh, yeah.
satirical-
That's China.
That was China. Yeah, because people were
comparing
using
the leader.
Yeah, we're
to
using Winnie the
Pooh.
Yeah, they were using
Yep.
Winnie the Pooh's name to as a pun, for the president's name, and the president was like, "I'm banning him because that's against the Chinese Constitution. You can't demean the communist office of the presidency."
How you doing, Rika?
Yes, the
Hey,
ultimate
don't
bastion of
hesitate to
freedom,
turn on your
socialism.
mic
Yeah.
and join in on the conversation here.
But what I was gonna say when I joined the call was you were talking about Operation Northwoods. You stated that John F. Kennedy's reason for the idea was that he objected to it. Well, at least you like the official narrative is he objected to it ethically. That's actually not true. If you read his official statement, the only reason that he shot it down was because he thought that Lyman Lemnitzer was incompetent, and he disagreed with how the strategy was formulated.
But I think that happened more than once, though, in Kennedy's administration, and he kept shooting it down. Is who an imposter, Rika?
Oh.
I don't know.
John F. Kennedy, I think, is what she was going for.
Oh.
Anyway,
Must be the...
hey, you guys know that the third Democratic debate's going on right now?
I did not, and I still do not care.
Oh, I was just
Really?
bringing that up for two reasons. One, that's probably where all the viewers are, but also, like, it's there. The upload on YouTube. I think it was from ABC, but I'm not sure. Is ratioed. Just thought that was funny, and it's a real indication of how fed up people are with the political system in general.
Yeah. Yeah, the Rika in the chat must be different from the Rika co-host here who's joined us. So.
Oh, I didn't see that. Hold on. Yeah, it has to be. I didn't say a word.
Rika, the hopeful voluntarist. Good name.
Okay, that's not me.
Yeah, this one is Rika X Nipa.
You sound like a female version of Joe Pera.
You never know. These are different usernames because the usernames in the voice chat is Discord, and then the text chat is YouTube. So, so you never know.
It is.
All right, 10 minutes left. If
the
anyone
other
can...
Rika must have been really confused at my constant prodding.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, wait, we got time for another topic, though, if you want to bring one up. Hello, Clabel the Fenicon.
Already.
Yeah.
What do you think about the national
ban on
debt?
video games right now?
What am I supposed to
Oh,
think
it's
about the
spelled
national
differently
debt?
anyways.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a different
Yeah.
spelling of the name.
It's over 22 trillion now, isn't it?
Oh, I was going to
Did
say...
someone say over 9,000?
I was cut off before I could finish about the national debt being 10 times the amount of tax receipts.
Yeah.
IRS.
It's still pretty funny how you mentioned in the AMA about how many of those credit organizations flat out told the United States government, we can't do this anymore. We're gonna have to decrease our credit limit and start being more manageable with our money. Otherwise, we're not going to. Otherwise, we're gonna collapse within the next decade. And they're like, "Oh, we're gonna sue you for $5 billion. You can't do that."
And it wasn't even. They were just taking them down from AAA to AA+. That's all they were doing, and they completely lost their heads about it.
That's not that's not even gonna work because right now the government spends $2.87 for every, I think it's three transactions that they engage in with $1.
Yeah.
It's getting so, the government is actually getting to the point where it's so expansive that just spending it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In all honesty, Shane, while I'm highly against, actually storming Area 51, I'm actually not against opening it up to the public, not because, I believe in aliens, but because the US government often uses Area 51 as an excuse for their government boondoggles. That's where a lot of those ridiculously expensive fighter jets, that barely work were being developed. And every time someone tried to bring up, saying, well, this fighter jet I'm hearing about, why can't, we audit it so we can see what our taxpayer dollars are being spent on? They're like, oh no, you can't. It's a military secret. If we show you the costs and all that, it'll compromise national security.
Well, and we've got all of this military stuff that's there, that's all set up from the time when we had the USSR. We had this huge enemy that we had to stand up against, and they've been gone for 30 years? Something like that. It's like, what are we still doing all this military spending for? Who's out there? It's not, it's not a bunch of, yokels in the desert who try and strap bombs to themselves and blow themselves up and can't even do that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Eric Prince of Blackwater flat out said, that's not how we should be fighting wars. I mean,
that remark,
and he said,
actually reminded me of that old joke about the suicide bombing instructor.
Oh, yeah.
Now pay attention. I'm only going to do this once.
Yeah.
Reminds me of
that was like I forget the guy's name, the ventriloquist who has Ahmed the dead terrorist, but it was like, yeah, well, what happened? How'd you die? New guy. God, I can't remember his name at the moment.
Jeff Dunham.
Jeff Dunham, thank you.
That's who it is, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man, his stuff is great. I love him.
Yeah.
He used to be everywhere like 10 years ago.
Yeah,
well, recently, a few months ago, he had a Netflix special from his show that he did in Ireland.
He's still doing
he still does stuff.
I bet the SJWs are downvoting it, though, like they did to David Chappelle.
Poor Dave Chappelle.
It's funny. Like the critics are all saying.
I don't mean poor Dave Chappelle in a bad way.
Yeah, it's like with David Chappelle. It's like, oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, is he still doing the Ahmed skit? Because that would genuinely surprise me if he was.
Oh yeah, but I mean, he's gone. It's not the same skit. I mean, he's just gone in completely different directions with the character.
Yeah.
So it's not the same stuff over and over again. He develops them over time.
I actually saw a clip of him.
Dave Chappelle's newest one is so funny because it's like the audience it has an audience score of like 99%, and the critics are like, "Oh, it's terrible, 0%."
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, don't listen to the critics.
Don't listen to the critics ever.
Yeah, Rotten Tomatoes used to be a good website, but then it got bought by that big, advertiser media that advertises for movies, and they basically told their critics, don't judge the film by its quality, what it has, so they actually tell their critics, don't worry about story and characters, just focus on, like, are the characters diverse, or is there all that? It's like...
Judged by industry standards, and industry standards are going to be, of course, subtly decided by the state.
I trust established fans more than I trust critics, because fans have their own interests at heart, whereas critics have usually have an agenda, like they're outsiders trying to push an agenda of some sort.
Well, a lot of them, it almost seems like they're just trying to be like, I'm better than you. I know.
Yeah, they're pompous. Like you imagine them, with their champagne glasses saying, I didn't like that movie. The character was rather uncivilized and uncouth, whereas the average person is like, movie was okay.
The wine connoisseurs of moviegoers. It's because of all these supported critics. They're the ones that are actually promoted by these aggregate websites like Rotten Tomatoes. Well, Rotten Tomatoes, as we'd already established, is working for these bigger movie studios, and we all know pretty much all of mainstream media is controlled by either one of the intelligence agencies or through the Council on Foreign Relations. Essentially, any critic which is going to be promoted as an official critic is going to be operating under a single set of narratives.
Right.
Well, I'm kind of like Zero. I am a little bit out of the loop. I don't quite understand how Dave Chappelle, in a matter of weeks, went from, oh, yes, he's one of the great things because diversity, because he's black, to being this, pariah of the left.
He released a video called Sticks and Stones, and in it he criticized the SJW movement and the political correctness. And one thing that he got a lot of flack for was he made a joke about abortion, and he said that while he's personally against abortion, he does agree that that it is up to a woman whether or not she wants to keep it. But he also added, however, I can't do his voice, but he says, but here's the thing. If you have the right to abort the baby, then if you decide to keep it, you should not be entitled to force me to pay for it.
Yeah. Okay, so he basically turned on them and he became the enemy, and now he's he's an alt-right Nazi and everything. And
he was like, basically the joke was, if you have the right to get rid of the baby, he says, if you have the right to kill the unborn baby, I have the right to abandon it.
Just make sure you follow through with the abortion and finish it. Otherwise, you end up with politicians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does people remember when Amy Schumer wanted Dave Chappelle money?
Yeah.
Right after her fucking failure of a
I saw her comedy special, and in all honesty, it wasn't cringy, it was just boring.
Are you kidding me?
She does the same thing. She goes from this dude, I woke up with this dude going down on me, to my vagina smells like dead fish within like 30 seconds. And it just goes back fucking timing music things, back and forth.
Someone made a joke saying, it's like, Amy, if your vagina is smelling like dead fish, you shouldn't be writing a joke about it. You should be going to your OBGYN.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. She made one joke, which I'm kind of surprised Shane even let you say what you did, but it's about
I've just given up on monetization at this point, so say what you want.
All right.
Yeah.
It was about she made a joke. It was about swimming in her swimming in a bunch of semen on the floor. And I'm just like, that made me cringe so hard. It reminded me a lot of terrible to this one streamer, Bathrobe Dwayne, who his audience sends him shock content just to get a reaction out of him. But that's the point. It's supposed to be. It's supposed to get a reaction.
Didn't Amy Schumer steal David Chappelle's "come in my face" joke?
Yeah, she's been pissing off a lot of comedians. Yeah, Joe Rogan talked about it, where she's constantly stealing jokes.
She steals I think she's even stolen a joke from Carlos Vencia, I think his name is.
Wow. If stealing a joke from a guy who steals jokes for a career.
No. He doesn't steal jokes. He introduces them to a Latino audience. His words, not
Yeah.
All right, it's after 10 o'clock, everyone. So let's get some parting thoughts in before we have to go.
Okay.
Wish I could have been here for the stream.
New Star Wars sucks. It was good to hear Voice Freak.
And I got involved in a debate about the debate I was kind complaining about earlier.
Like sequel Star Wars. What would Konkin have thought about it? We'll love to have heard that.
All right. Anyone else got something they want to say before we go?
Nope.
No.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thanks to everyone in the chat and my co-hosts, and of course, everyone who has supported. In particular, I think Absolute Freedom, I believe you're the only supporter who joined us this month. Everyone else is a co-host, but and this should work, I hope. It should automatically post. It should automatically post over on bittubers.com. And so if you're watching over there, thanks for watching that, because that's always monetized and it's never demonetized. Yeah. So we'll see if that works. If not, I'll see if I can upload it separately. But
you're saying everyone else is a co-host, or hopefully will be a co-host soon.
Well, okay, yeah, we haven't gotten Rika on yet. We've tried a couple of times, but eventually. But thanks, everyone. Until next time, stay strong and be free.